Hello, mathematicians. Here we are with Lesson 26, Session 3. We are going to develop displaying data in a line plot. Now remember, data is information that we've gathered, and a line plot is just another way to organize our information. They're actually going to help us do this step by step today. Now, they do have a table for us. We need to read and try to solve the problem below. Brian records the lengths of his earthworms in the table below. Draw a line plot using Brian's measurement data. Okay, so Brian went out and he recorded the lengths of his earthworms. That is the data that we have to organize. So he measured each of his earthworms using a ruler, much like the one we've been using. Then he took that information and he put it in a table. Now we're going to have to draw a line plot using Brian's measurement data. Now there's some steps to doing this. This actually takes a little bit of thinking. So I've kind of made a list over here on how to make a line plot. The first thing we need to do is think about the data they've given us. Let's look at the data. What are some of the words that we notice? What did they tell us about the data? The label says earthworm lengths, so we're looking at how long the earthworms are. What are some other words that you notice? They have earthworm, and that means what they've done is they've named the earthworms A, B, C, all the way up to H. So each one of these is a different earthworm. What's another word that you notice in our data table? It's the length. They are measuring how long each earthworm is, and it even tells us how they're measuring them. They're measuring them in inches. Now, let's think about the numbers. What numbers are they giving us? They're giving us the measurement in lengths. What do you notice about those numbers? Some are whole numbers, like 2, and some are fractions. I notice that there's a 1 1/2, there's a 2 1/2, but I also notice a 1 3/4 and a 1 1/4. So we don't have just whole numbers, we have fractions, and the fractions are in halves and quarters. Okay, now the next thing we would have to do is draw the line plot. And in order to draw a line plot, we need to know a few things. These are two words that they're going to use in the lesson, and I want to make sure you understand what they mean. They're going to use the word range. Range is the distance between the smallest number and the largest number. And largest. I'm out of room, so I'm using abbreviations. This is not just a hashtag, that's also the number sign. So the range is the distance between the smallest number and largest number. Let's go ahead up here. What is the smallest earthworm? What number do you notice is the smallest? So if we're looking for our range, what's the smallest earthworm? I think it's 1 1/4. Does anyone see anything smaller? We need to start at 1 1/4 because 1 1/4 is our smallest earthworm. What's our longest earthworm? I noticed a 2. Is there anything larger than 2? 2 1/2 is larger. Anything larger than 2 1/2? 2 3/4. So 2 3/4 is our largest earthworm. So our smallest is 1 1/4 inch. Our largest is 2 3/4 inch. This is going to help us make our table. And the distance between these two is the range. This is the range. Now the other thing that we need to talk about is the scale. Now we talked about scale when we were doing picture graphs and bar graphs. The scale is how we count. What are we counting by? How we count. Or should I say what we count by? What are we counting by here? We aren't counting by whole numbers. We aren't counting by ones because we have all these fractions. Are we counting by halves? Well, this one's a half, this one's a half, this one technically is a half. It's 4 halves, right? Can I use halves to count this one? I cannot because it's got quarters. So my scale, when I write my numbers in, I need to count by quarters, by 1/4. Okay. In other words, we need to count by quarters. That's important information we need to know in order to draw our line plot. Okay, so we thought about the data. We looked at what the words mean. We figured out what the numbers mean. And in order to draw our line plot, we now know our range and we know our scale. So we're going to go to the next couple of pages and they're going to help us and show us how to label and enter the data. Okay, turn the page. Okay, explore different ways to understand how to display data. Here is our same information. Here is our worm lengths. So let's go ahead and model it. You can use a number line to help you begin to draw the line plot. The earthworms are measured to the nearest 1/4 inch. So the scale is 1/4 inch. We just talked about that. So when we make our plot line, our number line, we have to count by 1/4. So notice that they do 1/4. Remember, 1/2 is the same as 2/4, right? 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1. Remember, that is the same thing as 4/4. So we are still counting by fourths. We just use their equivalent names. 0, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1. 1 and 1/4, 1 and 1/2, 1 and 3/4, 2. 2 and 1/4, 2 and 1/2, 2 and 3/4, and 3. So we have increments or scale of 1/4 inch. Notice right here, this is our shortest earthworm. Is that what we found? It is. 1 and 1/4 was the shortest earthworm. What was the longest earthworm? It was 2 and 3/4 inches long. So this is our range. If we make a line plot, we can either start at 0 and go to 3, or we could just make a line plot with those numbers because those have the range in them. Because we really don't need the 1/4 or the 1/2 or the 3/4 because all of our worms are much larger than that. We just need this part because that's the range. Okay, now we can model it. You can use models to help you display the data. The table shows how many earthworms there are of each length. Each X stands for one earthworm. Some people like to lay their data out in a table so that they can figure out the numbers before drawing their line plot. So for example, they looked at how many worms are 1 and 1/4 inches. So if we come up here, how many of them are 1 and 1/4? Oh, there's one. So I've counted that one. Any more? Nope, there's just one, and they put an X for the one earthworm. How many earthworms are 1 and 1/2 inches? Let's go up and see. There's a 1 and 1/2. And there's a 1 and 1/2. So there's 2 worms. So they put 2 X's. 1 and 3/4 inches. How many are 1 and 3/4? Oh, there's one. Oh, just the one. So they put 1. How many earthworms are 2 inches? There's one right here, and that's it. How many were 2 and 1/4 inches? None were 2 and 1/4 inches, so we leave that as nothing. How many were 2.5 inches? I've got 2. Notice how since I'm crossing them out as I count them, then I'm not going to lose track, and I'm going to make sure I count everything. So there were 2 that were 2 and 1/2. How many are 2 and 3/4? This one. And now I've used all my data. There's one that's 2 and 3/4 inches. Now some people can do this part in their head. Some people like to draw it out so they're precise. You do what you need to do to make sure you get a good answer. Okay, let's look at the back. Now we're going to connect it. Now we actually get to make our line plot. Now you will use the problem from the previous page to help you understand how to display data in a line plot. Complete the scale numbers on the line plot below. Use a scale of 1/4 inch. Okay, use a scale of 1/4 inch. They've started at 0. So what will be my first increment? What will be my first line? It should be 1/4. And then what's my next one? It could be 2/4, but remember we use the equivalent fraction of 1/2. 1/4, 1/2. This one's going to be 3/4. Pause the video and see if you can fill the rest in on your own, and then come back and check your work. Okay, this one's 1. This is 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, 2. 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 2 3/4. Is that what you got? Very good. Okay, number 2. How many worms did Brian measure? Let's go back and see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He measured 8 worms. There will be an X on the line plot for each earthworm. If 2 or more earthworms are the same length, the X's will be drawn one above the other. How many X's will be on the line plot? Remember, every worm gets its own X. So if there are 8 worms, how many X's will be on our line plot? 8. Oops. Okay. Number 4. How many worms are 1 1/4 inches long? Let's go back and see. Remember, we pulled that data out. There's only one worm that is 1 1/4 inches. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the 1 1/4. Where's 1 1/4? Well, I go to the 1 plus 1/4. I'm going to put an X right here. That's my first worm. Okay, there was one worm. How many worms are 1 1/2 inches long? How many are 1 1/2? 1 1/2 inches. There are, how many worms are there? There are 2. So draw that many X's above 1 1/2. Okay, where's the 1 1/2? There it is. How many do we need to draw? 2 X's. Okay. Complete the line plot. Make sure you draw an X for each earthworm measurement. Okay, so we did the 1 1/4. We did the 1 1/2. How many are 1 3/4 inches? There's 1. Let's go put that one on there. Okay, how many are 2 inches? There's 1. Am I going too fast? There we go. Now, how many are 2 1/4? There's none that are 2 1/4, so we're going to leave that one blank. 2 1/2 inches. How many are 2 1/2 inches? There's 2. So I'm going to put 2 1/2. One there and one there. See, I left that one blank because none of them measured 2 1/4. And how about our last one? How many are 2 3/4 inches? There's 1. Okay, now we have completed our line plot. Explain what each X on the line plot stands for. What does an X stand for? It stands for an earthworm. One earthworm. Okay, reflect. Look back at your Try It, Strategies by Classmates, and Model It's. Which model or strategy do you like best for displaying data in a line plot? Explain. Did you like making a table to organize the data? It was kind of nice to have that information already put together. And remember, we made that table to help us pull all this information together. Or could you just look at the data and figure out what the range is and what the scale are and create the line plot from that? Remember, the range is the distance between the smallest and largest measurements, and the scale is what we count by. So remember to do these things when you make your own line plot. Okay, page 563 is done. Now page 564. Let's go ahead and work on one of these together. Use what you just learned to solve these problems. Complete the line plot of the ribbon lengths data. Start by choosing a scale and labeling the scale numbers. Give the line plot a title. Ooh, they told us a lot. Okay, first we need to complete the line plot. and they've given us the ribbon lengths data. Let's stop and look. Remember, I told you one thing that we always need to do is think about the data that they've given us. What are the words and what are the numbers? What are some words they've given us in our data table? They gave us the ribbon lengths. And how did they measure those ribbon lengths? They measured in inches. What else do we see? We see some numbers. I see a 3, a 2.5, a 2.5, a 3.5, a 4.5. Ooh, I just noticed whole numbers and halves. Do we have any quarters? We don't have any quarters. So when it says start by choosing a scale, what can we count by? We can count by halves. We are going to count by halves because there are no quarters. So it would be silly to go to all that extra work when all we have are halves. Okay, so we chose a scale, 1/2, and label the scaling numbers. Okay, so if they gave us 2 as our starting number, what is my next number? What are we counting by? We're counting by halves. So my second number is 2 1/2. Remember, our jump is half an inch. So if I have 2.5 and I jump another 1/2 inch, what am I going to get to? 3. So notice I'm going 2, 2.5, 3. My next 1/2 inch will be 3.5. After 3.5, my next 1/2 inch will be 4. Then 4 1/2, and then 5. Okay, start by choosing a scale. We did that. And labeling the scale numbers. Oops, the sun just went away. It scared the puppies. Okay, now let's go ahead and keep going. Start by choosing the scale and labeling the scale numbers. We did that. Give the line plot a title. Okay, what's the title of this? It is ribbon lengths. So go ahead and write in ribbon lengths. Okay, now we just need to finish it. So let's go back and look at our list. We thought about the data. We figured out what the words and numbers mean. We drew the line plot. Actually, they did. We just labeled what we knew. Now we enter the data. Let's go ahead and enter the data. Okay, so I have 3 inches here. Where am I going to put an X? I'm going to put it on the 3. And since I'm done with this one, I'm going to cross it out. How about 2.5? Where's that one going to go? That goes right here. And since I'm done with that, I'm going to cross it out. And I'm going to keep going. 2 1/2. There's another one. 3 1/2. Put my X right there. 4 1/2. Here's my 4 1/2. You can hear my puppies chewing on their bones. Okay, number 3, or sorry, a ribbon that is 3 inches long. Where does that go? Oh, there we go, at the 3. I've got another that's 4 1/2. Cross that one out. And another one that's 4 1/2. So I had 3 that were 4 1/2. And I have to show you guys. Look who's looking at us. She's watching. She wants to learn math too. If I say her name, she'll jump up here, so I won't say her name. We'll just say hi. Okay, back to our work. Okay, so we are done. You guys did an awesome line plot. We have our title, we have our scale, and we entered our data. Okay, let's look at our next one. Draw a line plot of the data in the table. Start by choosing a scale and labeling the scale numbers. Give the line plot a title. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. So let's look at first. We need to figure out what do all the words and the numbers mean. So let's look at the data. What did they tell us? Well, they gave us plant lengths. And what do we know about plants? Well, they had all these different plants. And for each of the plants, what did they measure? They measured the length. How long is the plant? And what did they use to measure? They measured in inches. Okay, so now let's go ahead and figure out what we know about the numbers. Since we know what the words mean, what do the numbers mean? So our first plant, plant A, it has a length of 6 1/4 inches, a 6 1/2, a 5 3/4, a 6 1/2. Are you noticing something? I notice that I have halves and I also have quarters. So I have to think about, what is my scale going to be? What am I going to count by? If I count by whole numbers, does that work? Nope. Can I count by halves? No, because then I won't have a place to put A, and I won't have a place to put C and any of the other ones that have quarters. So my scale is the 1/4 inch. Now, what else do we notice? What is the smallest one and what is the largest one? What's the longest plant? I see 6 1/2. I see 6 3/4. Okay, this one is our largest one. Which one's our smallest, or which one is my shortest? My puppy's hitting the table. Here we go. Okay, so what is the smallest ribbon? I see a 5 3/4 and another 5 3/4. So this is the smallest one. So my range, I have to have at least 5 3/4 all the way through to 6 3/4. Okay, now that we know what the numbers mean, we know what our scale is, we know what our range is, we can actually start to put our information together. So let's go ahead and see, what did they do for our line plot? They didn't give us enough to go from 0 to 6 or 7. They only gave us a few. So remember, we have to count by quarter inches. So I know I have to end at least, see, my ending has to be at least 6 3/4. So I'm going to put that 6 3/4 has to be my end. Now, what are these going to be? Well, I know I have to have at least 5 3/4. Let's see. I'm going to have to do a guess and check. I'm going to put in a 5 3/4. And then I know this is going to be 6. And then this is going to be 6 1/4. And this one is going to be 6 1/2. Whew, I did number it right. I wasn't quite sure, so I started plugging in my numbers. And if it didn't work, I could have erased and started again. So our range is from our smallest to our largest. So I'm starting with 5 3/4. Okay, now it's time to put the data in. Okay, let's start with how many had 5 3/4. No. This one's 5 3/4. And this one's 5 3/4. So I have 2. 1, 2. So I'm going to put 2 X's. How many are 6 inches in length? There aren't any, so I'm going to leave that one blank. 6 1/4. There's one. And there's another one. So there's 2. So I'm going to cross them out so I know that there's 2. How about 6 1/2? I see 1, 2. There's a third one. So there's 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. How many are 6 3/4? Well, we only had one left. And now I have that. So now I have taken all my data from the table and I've put it into my line plot. I have 2 plants that are 5 3/4 in length. I have 2 that are 6 1/4. I have 3 that are 6 1/2 inches and 1 that's 6 3/4 inches. Now, start by choosing a scale. We labeled it. And now we need to give the line plot a title. What are we going to name it? We're going to use the same thing they gave us. We're going to say plant lengths. Okay, and that is the end of our little lesson on session 3. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take out the independent practice and you're going to read through the example and you're going to start to solve pages 565 and 566 on your own. And then when you come back, we'll go over the answers in video number 2.